Hey everybody. I want to, so I don't forget, go to the cyber campus, and I got to make sure I do this right here. Of course, I've got two different browsers set up here. I've got to make sure that I get on the right browser. So we go here to cyber campus, and then we go here, and then we go to American foreign policy, and go here, and to attendance, and week six, we do smart attendance, and your smart attendance number is 159, and I'll put that in the chat. So I do this 159, I go to stop share, and I go to chat, and I put in 159 like that. And there you go. And so now we go then to back to let's see, my lesson plan, and my lesson plan here, and make sure I show it to you so you can see what I'm doing here. I go share, and you can see the lesson plan that I have. And so what I showed you starting off was, of course, highlights from Netanyahu's speech to Congress. This is from, I think, in before Trump got elected in November 2024. And that was the last time Netanyahu's spoken to the U.S. Congress. And I think he's been invited to speak to U.S. Congress 4 times. 4 times he's spoken to a joint session of U.S. Congress where you had the House representatives and the Senate meeting together. He's spoken more times than anybody else, any other foreign leader, any international leader, to the U.S. Congress, more than anybody else, 4 times. And he has met 4 times since Trump got elected in November 2024. He has met 4 times with Trump since Trump became president in January 2025. He has met with Trump 4 times. I think he just finished meeting with Trump for the 4th time. So it just shows the closeness of the relationship between the United States and Israel, and a lot of it has to do with the Israel lobby. So if we go back here to the what I was showing you before, uh, uh, and of course I don't see it here. So no, that's not what I wanted. I'm surprised it didn't go. Netanyahu's speech, just issued Congress speech. You saw in that speech I showed you when he spoke to the U.S. Congress. I think in July, he spoke for an hour. He spoke for an hour. So you saw. Um, uh, it says here. I'm looking for not a Congress. I don't want that. So we go here. It's doing strange things, this computer, for some reason. I don't know what to make of it. It's not working. I go, it froze up. For some reason, it froze. Google Chrome is frozen up. I don't know why it's doing that. But if I go back to, see, I get this, and I can't move this little box out of the way. Like there's a little box that's uh, interfering with my ability to open up Google. Like, yeah, that little box there. I can't get Oh, there, now it moves. Okay. No, okay. So they're here to go back to a Netanyahu speech. I've got a history here. How would you go do it this way? Go to history. And so, yeah, this speech here, he spoke for about an hour. And you saw how the congressman stood up in a standing ovation. So if we go here, where if I can show you, yeah, you can see they're standing up. They stood up, I think, 52 or 54 times during his 1 hour speech. So every minute, all of the Congress people who he's addressing, they go like this. They stand up. You can't see me because I'm sharing screen. So they stood up and gave him a ovation about once every minute. About once every minute, all the congressmen and sitting behind him as the president of the Senate, and which is the vice president of the United States, is officially also the president of the Senate, presides over the Senate. And unless somebody else is asked to do the job because he can't be there, or Kamala Harris was the vice president back last summer, so she wasn't there. But typically, the vice president presides over the Senate and only votes to break ties. When the Senate has a tie vote, the vice president, if present, can vote to break a tie. And then the Speaker of the House of Representatives was also there. But they stood up about once a minute during more than once a minute during Netanyahu's speech. And so, why are they acting that way? Why were they acting that way? And they're acting that way because of the influence of the Israel lobby over the U.S. Congress, and that's a big focus of attention since we're talking about the U.S. Congress. And the point I want to make, and I need to make more than once here and say repeatedly, about 99% of the behavior of a U.S. congressman, whether in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, 99% of their behavior, 99% of their behavior is focused upon public opinion, shaping public opinion, and in order to get reelected, if they want to keep their jobs, to get reelected. And that's a slight maybe exaggeration, but not much. Not much. So you can pretty much predict or get a sense of how a congressman or a senator, because we call people in the House of Representatives congressmen and the Senate senators, or together we call them congressmen when we're talking about them all together also. You can predict pretty much how they're going to behave in terms of what they understand or think they need to do to keep their jobs. That means getting reelected. And even if they do not plan to run for reelection because they're too old or they don't like this game, they don't like the political game they have to play, and there are people who do that, right? They're still thinking about their job because typically they want to have a job after they're a member of Congress, perhaps working in Washington as a lobbyist for a private company that has been hired to influence and shape and influence the behavior of current congressmen people who are still in Congress, people who are still in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. So people that often leave the Senate or the House of Representatives, let's say they get defeated in an election, and it happens rarely, but it does happen. They leave the Senate. What they will do, they will get a job for a company that is paid to lobby and influence the Congress on upcoming legislation, upcoming votes on behalf of the customers, the clients that hire those lobbying firms to influence the congressman, and they will make 2, 3, 4, 5 times the salary that they were making when they were in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. They'll make much more money than they made when they're actual congressmen or actual senators. So even if they plan to leave the Congress, they're still thinking about how can they stay influential in the Congress. How can they remain influential over the other congressmen? Which means they are going to or have an incentive to not appear to be strongly opposed to the prevailing opinions and views that dominate the actual people who are in the Congress, who are actually the top leaders of the Democrat or Republican parties, the two main parties in the United States, right? And so that's always an important point to keep in mind, right? That, I mean, it's almost comical when you think that Benjamin Netanyahu spoke for an hour, and those congressmen in his joint address to the joint session of the two houses of Congress together, which is supposed to be a big honor, right? Only important people, world leaders are supposed to be invited to do that, whether it might be the Pope or Vladimir Zelensky actually was addressed to Congress, or the Prime Minister of Britain, whatever. If they gathered together and they gave standing ovations 52 or more than 50 times, so it's almost like it's a comedy. You're sitting down you stand up, sit down, stand up again, and a minute later, sit down, stand up again. And it's almost like a joke, but it's not a joke. These people know what they're doing. They know that according to the formula that they have established for their careers as elected professional politicians, professional elected politicians, this is what they want to do or what they think they should do or need to do to make sure that they are going to be reelected. And they know it's ridiculous. They're standing up every minute like that, right? But they're political animals. Their entire careers, not even their career, their identity, who they are, is focused upon. I am an elected professional politician, and I am successful because I win elections. I don't want to lose. Think about this class focuses a lot upon nationalism and identity. I mean, that's what people want. They want affirmation. I want to be confirmed by the world around me that I am an effective, successful, and therefore worthy and admirable. And I'm a good person because I'm not a failure. I don't want to be a failure. Failure, right? And if you lose an election, you're a failure. You tried and you lost. And your career is probably done as an elected professional politician. Well, you might become a lobbyist, as I already mentioned, right? So these people are political animals. They're always thinking about how do I win the election? And of course, they can always come up with a justification about why this is the right thing to do. It's not only good for me, that's what democracy is all about. And of course, everybody loves democracy, right? And so, how do you know if you're doing a good job in this democracy? Whether the people support me. How do you know the people support me? Because they elect me and they keep reelecting me. They keep reelecting me. Over 90% of the people in Congress who continue to run for reelection get reelected. And there's elections all the time in the U.S., right? Each of those congressmen, they have to go up for election every 2 years. So they have an even stronger incentive to think all the time about what do I need to do to influence the upcoming elections. And they have 2 elections, not 1, 2. They have to win every 2 years. They've got to win their party primary election. So, like, for example, in November 2026, right, is the next congressional election. We call it a midterm election because it happens in the middle of the term of the president. So Donald Trump was elected in November 2024. There's congressional elections in November 2026. And then, of course, the next presidential election is November 2028. So those congressmen, they're thinking about the general election in November 2026, and they are also thinking about the upcoming primary election in the spring of next year in 2026 that they have to also win in order to become the nominee, the official candidate nominated by the Republican and Democratic Party to run in November 2026, right? So, like I told you, I vote at least 3 times every year. I vote in U.S. elections in my home state of Ohio 3 times, at least 3 times, sometimes 4. Like a couple years ago, I think I voted 4 times in maybe 2023. Yeah, it was. I voted 4 times in 2023. So there are always elections coming up. And of course, this is the key about Donald Trump's control over the Republican Party. It's that primary election. We call it the primary election, where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have to choose and elect their candidates to run in the upcoming November election. So if I go to share, let me make sure I open this up here. I go back to Google Gemini here and make sure you can see what I'm looking here. So I go to share screen and I show you Gemini because I was looking things up before class started. And let's see here. It says here that I was looking up a lot of things, so I've got to find the right. And of course, then there was some problem with Gemini this morning, and it kept failing for some strange reason. So then I went to Grok, and I started using Grok for a while. So I don't know if it's necessarily here what I was looking for, and it might not be here. So of course I scroll down, and because there were some problems coming up here. So yeah, let's go to Grok here. I go here, stop the share. Let me find. Let's see what I can find here on Grok. Yeah, go to Grok here, and um, so maybe it's just best just to show you do the search in front of you. So again, show the share screen share here. And so make sure I'm looking at the right thing here. So we go back to, yeah, it's too confusing when you have to, so like, I'll ask again here. What percent, when is the spring 2026 primary midterm election, congressional elections in the congressional elections in Ohio in the United States? Because again, still the states have primary responsibility for organizing their own elections. So it's not necessarily always the case that they have the elections on the same date. I mean, it's typically in the spring. So it says here on Gemini that in May 2020. See, there's some kind of oh, I made a mistake here. I typed the wrong thing in. I can't, of course, I can't. Let's see if I can do this copy like that here. 2026. So we go like this, and it says here I think it's the same time, right? It's always the same time. So see, now there's a problem. Something went wrong. This is what happened this morning. Something went wrong. I don't know. So we go back to, let's go to Grok. When I thought I already looked this up on Grok. When I'm looking for where is it? Where is it? I have to check again. I have to do it again here. So you can see, yeah, it says here. So it's in May. It's in May, right? So um, when, yeah, I did some look. When is, okay, Mick, I got to stop share and show you the right screen here. So I got to share screen, go to Grok, which I've been using because there's some problem with Gemini. So it says here, when is the US primary congressional midterm elections in Ohio in 2026? In 2026. And it says that it's in May 5th, 2026. So that election is then to the election we have to decide who's going to be the nominee for the Republicans and for the Democrats to run in the November 2026 election. And so I did an earlier search. Okay, you can see as I scroll up here to show you what I found before that this morning when I was looking through, working on this morning, that it says here that to scroll to the top here, that in the November 2022 elections, again, a midterm election between the November 2020 presidential election and the November 2024 presidential election, we call that the congressional midterm elections. 52% of eligible voters in the United States voted. Just a little bit over half of people who can vote, who are allowed to vote, bothered to vote. So 48% a little less than 48% of people didn't even bother to vote in the November 2022 elections, right? And so this is an important point. Who does vote? People like me and other people who pay closer attention to politics, who are more interested in politics, we will bother to go to the trouble of voting, right? But almost half of people didn't even bother to vote in the midterm elections in November 2022. And then what about the primary election in spring 2022? What percentage of American voters bothered to vote in the spring, about May time primary elections? Because there's some difference among the states, but it's all basically in early 2022. What percentage bothered to vote? 21.3% of voters bothered to vote in spring 2022 to determine who would then be the candidate for Congress in November, when about half of eligible voters are. So this is really important. Who do you think bothered to vote in May, let us say May 2022? You can see only about one-fifth, a little over one-fifth of eligible voters bothered to vote. And who would be among those 21%? It would be people who pay close attention to politics, who are really interested in politics. Or let's say, in spring 2026, in May 2026, next year, right? It's going to be people who love Trump. They're going to love Trump. Those people who love Trump, and again, about one-third of eligible voters in America, they don't just like Trump, they love him. And those people will vote in the Republican primary election in spring 2026. And I know it, and you know it, and they all know it. So this is the sort of source of Donald Trump's control over the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress today is not stopping Donald Trump in dropping bombs and killing people that he claims are narco terrorists off the coast of Venezuela. He just did it again. 4 boats have been bombed and the people on them killed. Over 20 people killed because Donald Trump said they're narco terrorists. We're at war with them. So they're unlawful combatants. And since they're unlawful combatants, like the Al Qaeda and Taliban are unlawful combatants. And 22 years ago, when the United States invaded, or 24 years ago, when the United States invaded Afghanistan, I can kill them because we're at war with them. Who says I say? I'm President of the United States, Donald Trump. I can do whatever I want. And the Congress doesn't stop him. When the people that wrote the U.S. Constitution, they wanted balances to restrain the president, and the president would restrain the Congress and the Supreme Court. But the Congress under Republican control, because the Republicans have the majority of the seats in the House of Representatives and the majority of seats in the Senate. So the Republicans control the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they're not stopping Trump. They're not preventing him from taking too much power, more and more power. They're letting him do what he wants to do. And that's because of this, that Donald Trump controls the primary elections, right? The primary elections. So because the people that really are strong enthusiasts of Trump, the enthusiasts, they will come out to vote. They will vote. And that's the source of his domination of the American political system. Now, maybe that might change when we have the November 2026 general midterm elections in November of next year, because there'll be higher turnout. And of course, maybe the Democrats also will be more likely to come out and vote as well in the general election. So we don't really know what's going to happen. There's people that are concerned that Donald Trump is going to try to make sure that the elections in November 2026 are not free and fair. Right, that he will try to implement policies that intimidate. For example, you can imagine scenarios for intimidation whereby he's boosting tremendously the size of the Immigrations and Custom Enforcement ICE force that is trying to round up and arrest and deport people without documentation to be legally in the United States. That they're tremendously increasing the size of that military. I guess that ICE force, that ICE police. I guess now I heard on this morning that that on American football games, people, Americans love football, American football. During the advertisements during the football games, there's these advertisements for people to join the ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Oh, I didn't think about this. Let's see if I go back to YouTube. I didn't think to check on this. ICE advertisements. See, ICE recruitment video. I guess they're showing this during games. Let's see what comes up. So make sure we go to. Let me. You can see what I see here. So share, and we go here and go back to YouTube. And I didn't look. I didn't prepare for this. Okay, well, the point I mentioned, they're also being offered big money. Like if you sign up, you get a $15,000 bonus. And of course, the US Congress has agreed to triple the size of the ICE budget. So billions of dollars are put into ICE. So you can imagine, we don't know. People are imagining this, what could happen, that he won't cancel or suspend the November 2026 elections, as some have been predicting. Like Felipe Sands is a famous human rights lawyer. I saw him last year say that he's talking to his American colleagues that are worried that Donald Trump is going to try to somehow not have elections in November 2026, right? Because he doesn't want the Democrats to take control of the Congress, either one or both houses of the Congress, the House of Representatives or the Senate. He doesn't want that, because if they can get a majority in one of the two houses or both, they can then use their power to launch investigations and use the legal power of the Congress to carry out investigations, gather information, require people to testify as witnesses, and be in danger of being persecuted if they lie for perjury before Congress. You'd be sent to jail for that. So Donald Trump doesn't want that to happen. So for example, he's pressuring the states to redistrict and change their borders of their congressional districts in Texas and elsewhere in Missouri to increase the number of people that will be elected through gerrymandering. And I try to remember if we talked about gerrymandering in this class, because I talked about it last class in the U.S. government and politics class, right? It's a way by which you try to change the borders of your electoral district, that you have to win those two elections in spring and in November, so that you get more Republicans in there, and you get more Republicans automatically elected. Because again, as I mentioned previously, about 80 to 85% of voters in the United States, we already know how they're going to vote, right? They're going to vote according to their party identification. I'm a Republican. I work at McDonald's. I'm a janitor. I'm whatever. And I don't have time, like Professor Ben and his students in American history, just time studying politics and looking at the internet and studying information. No, I got to vote because it's my obligation as an American citizen to vote. So how am I going to vote? I don't have time. I don't have information. Oh, I'm a Republican. I vote for Republicans. a Democrat, I vote for Democrats. That's true for about 85% of American voters, 80 to 85%. It's the other 15, 20% that swing back and forth, and they determine the outcome of these general elections typically, right? So he's trying to encourage people to carry out gerrymandering. And if we go back to well, let me continue with this point about ICE. Right, I can imagine if he doesn't suspend the elections or try to suspend them in November 2026, he's going to send these ICE police officers to polling stations where people go to vote in order to scare them into not showing up. Because, for example, I mean, about 15% of Americans are Hispanic. Their family and friend, their families are about may have one member of their family who's not legally, say, in the United States. So 15% of Americans are Hispanic, right? So they might have a father who married, who is connected to with a legal American citizen, a woman is the mother is legally, the father is not legally in the United States. They have a baby. That baby is a child that and is legally born there, or they brought in somebody who was already born outside the United States, illegally in the United States. So the point is, there's going to be a lot of fear that, particularly if these people find you and they just show up in their masks and arrest you. And because you're brown, you look Hispanic, and then they take you to some building and they push you or they scare you and they find out from you that you have family, and then they use their oppression powers, their oppressive powers, to find your mother, your father, who's not legally in the United States, if you're a young voter, or your brother or sister who's not legally in the United States. I'm trying to imagine that there will be elections, but they're not free and they're not fair because they use intimidation against enough people so that the outcome of the elections is not in favor of the Democrats. That's another option, right? That you can imagine. I already mentioned about gerrymandering, this notion of gerrymandering. If I stop the share and we go back to Gemini, here. Oh, I forgot to open up Gemini. Or let's ask Grok. What is gerrymandering? What is gerrymandering? So you can see me typing in gerrymandering, right? So gerrymandering is the manipulation of electoral district boundaries to favor one political party candidate or group of others, often creating an unfair advantage in elections. The term originates from 1812 when Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry approved a redistricting plan with a salamander-shaped district to benefit this party, combining Gerry and salamander. So yeah, packing and cracking. And this is from Wikipedia, because Wikipedia's got a nice little entry on it. So if we go to, you can see, and the states, Ohio, Texas, they're responsible for drawing the congressional boundaries. So let's just stop the share here and go back to Wikipedia and well, I don't have let's see here, new tab, go to Wikipedia and just type in gerrymandering in the US, gerrymandering in the US. So go back here to Zoom, do the share here, go here. There's a nice entry on gerrymandering in Wikipedia. Gerrymandering, hooray! There you see gerrymandering, and so you can see there's Elbridge Gerry's district that he drew, so that because he knows how these people are going to vote, and so he drew this electoral district in a way to make sure that his preferred candidate won the election by drawing the boundaries in such a way to make sure that these voters, whom he knows how they're going to vote, whether Democrat or Republican, will vote for the right party, the right candidate that he wants to win. And so you can see here, like I'm with gerrymandering in the U.S. So gerrymandering, let's see, find United States. So what Donald Trump has done is he's pressured Texas and other Republican-controlled states to redraw their boundaries in such a way that the Republicans will get more votes in the upcoming congressional elections in November next year. That's not supposed to happen. That's unusual. That's unusual, but it's going on now because Donald Trump is pressuring the Republican Party to do this because he doesn't want the Democrats to take control of one of the houses of Congress next year, right? So you can see here's an example, and he's pressuring Texas because Texas is controlled by the Republican Party. So you can see how they drew the boundaries in 2002 here. So this is going to be, this is Austin cities tend to vote Democratic, right? So this is one congressional district, right? So you don't want a Democrat to go to Congress to represent this district in the U.S. House Representatives for the Democrats from Texas. So what you do is you divide up this area among 3 different districts. So the Democrats are diluted, reduced. So they're a minority here, they're a minority here, and they're a minority here. And so, voila, you reduce the Democrats in U.S. Congress coming from Texas because the Democrats are concentrated here in this urban area, and you divide them up among 3 different districts. And so you remove one Democrat house from the House of Representatives in U.S. Congress. You understand? So you gerrymander the electoral districts in this way. And that's what Donald Trump has just persuaded the Republicans to do in Texas last month. It's September, just last month. You're supposed to do it once every 10 years. That's been the practice. That's been the standard practice, but it's not legally written down anywhere. You only can do it once and once every 10 years. No. So he persuaded pressured the Republicans in Texas to do this so that the Republicans will hopefully get 5 more congressional seats in November 2026 at the expense of Democrats from Texas. And so, California said, oh, yeah, because California's a Democratic state. They responded by now they're trying to redo their gerrymandering of California congressional districts so that to counterbalance Texas. So get 5 more Democrats from California to counteract the 5 more Republicans that'll come from Texas. And now Missouri and all the states are engaged in this battle, right, to redistrict. So that's an example but it all goes back to this point here that we know in these upcoming congressional elections that you're going to get low turnout. You're going to have low turnout of voters, relatively low turnout. And that means this is how Donald Trump controls the Republican Party, because even though majority of Americans don't like Donald Trump, the majority of Republicans do. And that means Donald Trump can control the primary election process. And if he doesn't like you as a Republican, he's not going to endorse a Democrat. But what he can do is in the spring elections for the primary elections to choose the nominee for the party for the upcoming November elections. He will find somebody whom he likes to run against you. If you're a Republican he doesn't like, because you don't do what he tells you to do in Congress. So that's why the U.S. Congress, which was originally intended to be, you could say, maybe the most important branch of Congress, the people that wrote the U.S. Constitution, they intended the U.S. Congress to be the I don't want to say the number 1, but it's Article 1 of the Constitution focuses on the Congress, right? Focuses on the Congress. Make sure I'm showing you the right thing. Okay, so I stop share and we go back to share. I'll make sure I open up the Gemini, because and make sure zoom that and share that. Go here to share. We go back to Gemini, and you can see here that so scrolling down here. And scrolling up, I should say. So what did I want to show you here? Okay, so see what I want to show you here. But the people that wrote the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Constitution, They were suspicious about giving too much power to the U.S. president, and they wanted the Congress to be an equal, at least an equal, if not more, in power with the U.S. president. But what has happened since the U.S. Constitution was written, and I'm trying to find where I had put this, and I don't think I must have put it under Grok. So let's go back to Grok. Stop share, and we go. Let me go back to Grok here, and let's see. Make sure the screen. Um, share. Uh, the uh, the the people that wrote the U.S. Constitution were very suspicious about giving too much power to somebody who could become a dictator. And so they were just obsessed with that notion about how to make sure that you don't have the coming to power of a dictator. I don't think I have it here. So the so I can't remember where I found where I looked for this. I guess I'm just because I know I looked for it, but I can't find it. But anyway, okay. Well, if I do here, if I type in here on, let's go back to Grok since you're looking at Grok. Um, um, how did the founding fathers of the U.S. Constitution view the role of parties? And I had it somewhere, but I can't find it now. But I just do it again here. And it says here, the founding fathers, the people who wrote the U.S. Constitution, had a complex and fairly skeptical large view of political parties, often referred to as factions in their writings. They didn't trust parties. And you can see George Washington in his farewell address warned against the Bainwell when he was leaving the presidency in 1996. He was done after 2 terms. He didn't want to run again. He warned against the baneful effects of the spirit of party, cautioning that parties would foster jealousies and false alarms, divide the nation, and invite foreign influence. Right, and so they were suspicious of parties. They didn't foresee the role of political parties in the U.S. political system, but nevertheless, so they had, for example, these safeguards of the separation of powers, checks and balances, a large Republican electoral system, and of course, but nevertheless, after the first elections in the early 1980s, you started seeing the emergence of parties. They emerged anyway. They emerged anyway. And they become a critical part of the U.S. political system, Democrat, Republican today, right? But that's why the U.S. Constitution does not function the way the founders intended, with a strong, autonomous Congress. The Congress today does whatever Donald Trump wants it to do. It doesn't challenge him. It doesn't stop him as he orders the military to blow up people in boats that he just says, those are narco terrorists. You just have to trust me. We know what we're doing. The Congress is not stopping. That was not intended by the founders of the Constitution. They didn't intend it because they didn't foresee the role of parties. And they didn't foresee the role of parties because they didn't understand, or they couldn't understand the nature of public opinion. You cannot understand public opinion in the modern era unless you understand the nature of nationalism. And Donald Trump has got that core support from about 1/3 of American militant nationalists that he has successfully appealed to control the Republican Party through these primary elections in particular, right? And so he's able to the Congress doesn't stop him, and they won't stop him until the Democrats take at least control of at least one House of Congress. And he knows that, and I know it, and you know it, and that's why he's trying to fix the outcome of the elections. He's doing so far; it's been legal. Right? Gerrymandering is not illegal. It is to some extent regarding if you do gerrymandering purposefully, intentionally keep black people from being in the Congress. If you do that, or Hispanic people from being in the Congress, if it's clear that the gerrymander is done in a way such that to keep black people and Hispanic people from being elected to Congress, then that's illegal. And that was established 60 years ago in the 1960s. Not that long ago, right? But otherwise, you can do it with gerrymander however you want to. And so what he's been doing so far is technically legal, but sending ICE agents to hover around where people are voting and say, hey, you look like you could be an illegal immigrant. Show your papers. Arrest you. You can't with us. Oh, support your family. Where's your family? Where's your house at? Where does your family live? What's their address? Tell us. Tell us. I'm going to find out that they're going to find my dad who's not legally in the United States. And so they won't vote. They won't turn out to vote because they'll be scared. And then Hispanic people tend to vote for Democrats because the ICE agents are everywhere. That's more plausible. That's possible. That's probably likely. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, 13 months from now. Um, But that's why, and congressmen know, they've always known that voters generally do not vote on the basis of foreign policy, right? Again, these congressmen are always focused upon what do I need to do to keep my job, to not be a loser, to win re-election, right? And they know that most voters, not all, but most voters do not decide how to vote on foreign policy most of the time. Sometimes many will, like if the United States, gets into a new war, let's say um, uh, Donald Trump orders the invasion of Mexico. He probably won't do that because he's not politically foolish. But if he bombs Mexico or he sends drones in to strike at supposed Mexican drug laboratories making drugs to smuggle those drugs and sell them illegally in the United States, that's something you can imagine. You can see he's not invaded Venezuela, but he's killing Venezuelans. He's killing people in boats off the coast of Venezuela international waters. So he is killing people, right? But but typically, most American voters they don't vote on their primary concern is not foreign policy. They vote on how the economy is doing, for example, right? They vote on that's their primary concern, and so that's if you're a congressman, you know that. And of course, Americans tend to give, rightly or wrongly, the majority of Americans tend to give the benefit of the doubt to the U.S. president, to the U.S. president, when he says it's time to go to war. We talked about that rally around the flag effect. That's what that is, right? You give the benefit of the doubt to the U.S. president. And if you're a congressman, you don't, and you're an ambitious politician, let's say you think you want to become president, right? Opposing the president when he says it's to go to war. You might be right, but if you vote against him when he asks Congress to say, okay, let's go to war, you're going to pay a price. And so it's been notorious, right, that Hillary Clinton, when she was in the Senate, and when John Kerry, when he was in the Senate, they both ran for president and lost, right? Hillary Clinton in 2016 and John Kerry in 2004, I believe. He ran against George W. Bush. They were both senators, and they voted against authorizing George Bush to. I'm sorry, I'm not. They voted in favor. They voted in favor of authorizing George W. Bush to invade Iraq in 2020 in 2003 and in 2001, basically, in 2001, 2002, to authorize George Bush's decision that we need to invade Afghanistan and invade Iraq. And they voted in favor of it. Senator John Kerry and Senator Hillary Clinton. Why? Even though many people were saying, don't do that, that's wrong. We don't think Iraq had anything to do with invading, with the attacks of September 11, 2001 in the United States. They were ambitious politicians who knew that if you voted against the president, when the president used his position as commander in chief and saying, we have to do this for the security and well being of America, I'm calling upon Americans to support us as we go to war to protect America. If you vote against him, even if you're right, you're going to make sure that you're going to suffer politically in the future. And of course, they voted in favor of that and they still lost the presidency. the presidential election, and it was used against them. When, of course, the Iraq invasion turned out that there was no weapons of mass destruction Saddam Hussein was building in Iraq, the fact that Hillary Clinton voted in favor of that, or John Kerry voted in favor of it, it was used against them because they were portrayed as your typical ambitious, professional, ambitious politician, right? They don't care fundamentally about, you know what, you can't win. Barack Obama got elected in 2008, partly because when he was in the Senate, he no, Barack, when did Barack Obama? He voted against the a war in against the war in Iraq, looming against the looming war in Iraq, and I think he was a senator from Illinois. Yeah, he was an Illinois state senator. He wasn't even in a senator yet. He was a senator for the state of Illinois, inside Illinois, in the Illinois government. You know where Chicago is located, the state of Illinois. Uh, I oppose a dumb war. He said before he was a U.S. senator, and then after this, when did Barack Obama? So that's how he made his reputation. I stayed against George W. Bush's declaration he wants to invade Iraq. Um, and so when did Barack Obama become a U.S. senator from Illinois? And it says here on January 3rd, 2005. So he won in November 2004 and then became a U.S. senator. So he wasn't a U.S. senator during the war, when George W. Bush began the war on terror after September 11, 2001 attacks. So that gave him a lot of credit when he ran for president in 2008, when it was clear that, Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. George W. Bush, he persuaded Americans to reelect him in 2004, saying, well, if you don't reelect George Bush as president, you're going to give success to Osama bin Laden, because Osama bin Laden will say, aha, I destroyed the political career of your president, George W. Bush. So support the troops, support the troops. Elect George W. Bush. Don't let Osama bin Laden claim that he is winning against the Americans by destroying the presidency of George W. Bush. Support the troops, support the troops, support the troops by voting for George W. Bush to be reelected in 2004. And it worked. He got reelected against John Kerry. John Kerry ran against him. And then, of course, that was his reelection. So John McCain became the presidential nominee for the Republican Party, Senator John McCain in 2008, and he lost to Barack Obama. So the Congress is only an obstacle or a restrainer on the U.S. president when the other party controls the Congress, at least one house of the Congress, right? And so as we talk about all of these outrages going on, in the with the Donald Trump administration, the U.S. Congress does not challenge him, because the Republicans congressmen know that if they want to keep their careers, they have to not oppose him, even though it's the Congress that's supposed to, make these decisions about whether or not to declare war. Now, keep this in mind, right? The U.S. Congress has not formally declared war since World War II. I think the last countries that the U.S. Congress said, we hereby declare that a state of war exists between our nations, was against Bulgaria and Romania. I think when the U.S. Decided to declare war on them in 1944. When did the U.S. declare war on Bulgaria? when did the U.S. declare war on Bulgaria? Let's see here. And it said the U.S. declared war on Bulgaria and it was the last time there was a formal declaration of war by the U.S. Congress against, it says, yes, 1942, sorry, 1942, along with Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. And that was, but ever since then, the U.S. got involved in the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and all other wars without a formal declaration of war being approved by the U.S. Congress. That hasn't happened since World War II, right? Harry S. Truman, he sent U.S. forces into battle against the North Korean army without getting a formal declaration of war from the U.S. Congress. Now, the U.S. Congress later approved it, but without a formal declaration of war. They did it in other forms. Or, for example, I think I have it here. In 1964, the U.S. Congress gave an authorization to the U.S. President Johnson to do what he thought was necessary to deal with the communist threat in Vietnam. And so if I can find it here, because I don't know where which either under Grok or Gemini, I put that search. But of course, if I look here, let's go back to Gemini. So I go back to stop share, go to Gemini here, and make sure that you can see the screen here under share. And we go here to Gemini and go here. And I think, yeah, it says, yeah, okay. So it says here, what was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution? The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, named after the Gulf of Tonkin, a sea area off the coast of Vietnam, officially known as the Southeast Asia Resolution, was a joint resolution passed by the U.S. Congress on August 7, 1964. It authorized use of force for Lyndon Johnson to take all necessary measures to repeal any armed attack against the force of the United States and to prevent further aggression. The response to the incident, the resolution was passed in direct response to the Gulf of Tonkin incident of early 1963, August 1964, which involved alleged unprovoked attacks by North Vietnamese torpedo boats and U.S. destroyers. Now, that turns out to have been false. That was incorrect. It was faked. But again, you can see how the U.S. Congress at this time, which was controlled by, I think it was controlled, yeah, it was controlled by the Democrats. The Democrats controlled both houses of Congress at this time. And well, did they? Did the let's see here. Did the U.S. which parties controlled the Congress when the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed in 1964? And it says, okay, yeah, the Democratic Party, Lyndon Johnson's party, controlled both houses of the U.S. Congress when the Gulf resolution was passed in August 1964. And and of course, now I don't know if you can see it was overwhelmingly passed, 416 to 0 and 88 to 2. So the Republicans all voted for it too. So in that case, it wouldn't have made much difference because the Republicans and the Democrats all believed the U.S. president and agreed with the U.S. president that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, looking to Ho Chi Minh and the communists in Asia and everywhere. Empire. And so we have to give the U.S. president all the authorization, all the power he needs to act freely and decisively wherever those communists are attempting to carry out their evil efforts to their communist empire. And so, yes, sir, Mr. President, we give you authorization to contain those bad communists everywhere, including in this case. So, of course, this would be challenged later as it became clear that the United States had made a mistake or didn't want to admit it made a mistake. But of course, as the war dragged on, and in 1965, Lyndon Johnson would send in the U.S. Marines. When did the Johnson, Lyndon LBJ, send Lyndon Johnson? When did President Lyndon Johnson send in the large battle groups into Vietnam? And it was in 1965, right? It was in 1965 when it says here, yeah, in March 1965. And as we talked about, when the war went on and on and on, and as it became clear that this wasn't some communist insurgency inspired by and supported by Moscow and Beijing, but that in fact the U.S. was in a civil war. And even though the United States had 500,000 soldiers at one point in Vietnam and had all of its military capabilities, and it's against poor, poverty-stricken North Vietnam, it wasn't able to win. The Congress then began to rebel. Uh, and it took a while to rebel. So, for example, if you scroll back up here, um, yeah, so you can see the legal basis for the war. Early signs of resistance, right? There were some dissenting to only two members. Democrats from senators from Oregon and Arkansas voted against it. And then the Fulbright hearings, as the war goes on and on and on. And Senator Fulbright from Arkansas, who was an interesting character, right? Because he used to be a strong cold warrior. We got to contain those communists. But as it became clear that the United States' view of what was going on in Vietnam was wrong, this wasn't something instigated and made by Moscow and Beijing. That's not it. We talk about it in terms of nationalism, right? He began to challenge this. And eventually, it led to legislative efforts to curb presidential power in 1969 to 73. And so you can see they began to stand up to the president. By this time, Lyndon Johnson, so Lyndon Johnson, when it became clear that he made a mistake in Vietnam, he decided not to run for reelection. And so Richard Nixon won election in November 1968, defeating Lyndon Johnson's vice president, Hubert Humphrey. And you begin to see the Democratic Congress begin to start to challenge the Nixon administration. And again, now Nixon is a Republican. The Democrats begin to challenge the Nixon administration, finally leading to the repeal of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1971. Remember, people were fighting and soldiers were killing people in the United States who were rebelling, like at Kent State University in May 1970, close to where I live in Ohio. The soldiers fired on the protesters and killed 4 college students protesting against the war in Cambodia and Vietnam. And then the War Powers Resolution. So this is talked about in your book. The U.S. Congress did attempt to limit the ability of the U.S. president to use deadly military force. And it says here, if we scroll down further here, so what is the War Powers Resolution? Do I have it here? Here it is, the War Powers Resolution Act of 1973, and it's still in effect. No U.S. president has agreed that this is constitutional, but it's not been challenged in the courts yet, right? So the War Powers Act, formerly known as War Powers Resolution of 1973, is a federal law intended to check the U.S. president's power to commit the United States to an armed conflict without the consent of the U.S. Congress. It was enacted November 7, 1973, when Congress overrode a veto by President Richard Nixon. So again, the Democrats control the Congress, and Nixon vetoed it, and they overrode the veto, which required a 2/3 majority vote. So they overrode his veto by 2/3 majority vote in the Senate and in the House. And so the key provisions of it, again, this is after the disaster, the catastrophe in Vietnam, right? It says here, the resolution was a direct response to concerns of the expansion of presidential power and foreign military engagements, particularly the undeclared Vietnam War and secret bombings of Cambodia. And its core purpose is to reassert constitutional authority of Congress, which is the power to declare war over the executive branch of military decision-making. Now, it says undeclared war. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that those kinds of authorizations, like the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, or the authorization of use of military force in 2001 and 2002 by the U.S. Congress after the September 11, 2001 attacks, that those are the equivalent of declarations of war, that those do fulfill the constitutional obligation for the Congress to give the president the authorization to use deadly force. They're not official declarations of war like in 1942 against Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary, but they are functionally the equivalent, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. That the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was basically the exercise of the congressional authorization to use force that the executive branch should have. So the key provisions of this include the U.S. president has to consult with the Congress in every possible instance. That the president must report to the U.S. Congress in 48 hours of introducing U.S. armed forces into hostilities or imminent hostilities, the territory, airspace, or waters of a foreign nation equipped for combat, numbers that substantially enlarge U.S. forces already located in a foreign nation. So, and of course, there is a withdrawal deadline of 60 days. The armed forces must be withdrawn within 60 days after the report is submitted or was required to be submitted unless Congress has either declared war and enacted specific authorization for the use of military force, right? So you can see that term, the authorization of use of military force, right? Or extended the 60-day period, or there is an inability to meet because of an armed attack in the United States, like a nuclear attack in the United States, for example, or the 60-day period can be extended by an additional 30 days for a safe and complete withdrawal of U.S. forces. In short, the law limits the U.S. president's unilateral authority to deploy troops in conflict to a maximum of 90 days, 60 days plus for 60 plus 3 for withdrawal without congressional approval. So it says that okay, how this is important is, of course, because Donald Trump has informed the U.S. Congress about his use of military force off the coast of Venezuela. So if we go back here, can I find this? All right. So okay. Yeah, just a second. I'm looking for something I looked for earlier. Okay, yeah, here you can see here. Um, so we already covered what the War Powers Act is. Um, so supposedly Donald Trump has informed the Congress that he's striking at these boats off the coast of Venezuela. And the question is now, unless the U.S. Congress responds and gives him authorization, is he going to stop doing it? Because he's supposed to get approval from the U.S. Congress to keep doing this. And he has informed the U.S. Congress, and now we're waiting to see if these deadlines come, what he will do if the U.S. Congress does not give him authorization. Or will the Congress give him an authorization? Will the current Congress authorize him to continue using deadly force off the coast of Venezuela because he claims that they're unlawful combatants? Unlawful combatants. Again, so much of this has a precedent in other behavior until the present because the U.S. had declared, for example, when it invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, that those people are unlawful combatants. In other words, they don't act like regular military soldiers. So they're unlawful combatants because they hide among civilians. The Taliban, Al Qaeda hide among civilians. They dress up like civilians. They're terrorists. They are not lawful combatants under the laws of war as represented by the Geneva Conventions that were adopted after the Second World War. So they're not, the Taliban and Al Qaeda terrorists are not given the legal protections as prisoners of war because they don't act like they don't act like legal soldiers. They act as terrorists. They attack civilians. They hide like among civilians. They attack civilians as terrorists. So they're not lawful combatants. They're unlawful combatants. And so we can capture them. We can kill them without trial. We can, by airstrikes from drones, because and we can even use torture against them. Although we don't call it torture, we call it physical pressure, because we need more information from them to prevent more terrorism that's being planned now, even as we speak. We have to get that information now so we can waterboard them, we can abuse them, we can torture them. But of course, they don't use the term torture because they're unlawful combatants. They're terrorists. They don't get legal protections like normal troops do of the enemy. And so that's what Donald Trump has said this summer, this past few months, that those people in those boats that he's killing, those are unlawful combatants. Because we've used that before. Now, of course, the Congress earlier. Oh, by the way, there's an important professor, John Yoo. He's a Korean American professor at Stanford University. He played an important role in declaring that those people in Afghanistan and Iraq and around the world that the Americans are capturing as part of Al Qaeda, that they are unlawful combatants. So he played an important role, and I just mentioned it because he's a Korean American professor who I thought was going to get a job in the second Trump administration, but he didn't get it. And other people who are you can doubt them, you can challenge them, but they have independent personality. And the speculation is that people like John Yoo and Robert Lighthizer and trade, they didn't get jobs in the Trump administration because Trump doesn't trust them because they're independent thinkers. And he doesn't want people who are going to be independent personalities. He wants people who do what he tells them to do, like Peter Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, or he calls himself Secretary of War, and other people. He wants people who will do what he tells them to do, who are completely dependent upon him, who don't have autonomous willpower to resist Trump when Trump wants something done. And so that's why John Yoo, despite my expectation, didn't get another position in the U.S. administration like he had under George W. Bush at the beginning of the so-called War on Terror. Yeah, John Yoo, he even said a month or two ago, an attorney professor, Gemini is not really very good. He's a professor at I think it's he in California, either Berkeley or Stanford. He argued that use of military force and deadly force against suspected drug traffickers off the coast of Venezuela, as ordered by the Trump administration, generally goes too far and risks blurring the line between military action and law enforcement. In other words, he's saying that that's not legal. So you can see he has an independent personality. He's saying this is dangerous. We haven't had a declaration of war. We haven't even had an authorization of use of military force like we had in 2001 and 2002 from the Congress. We don't have that yet from the Congress. They haven't given it to Trump yet. We'll see if they give it to him. So see if I can find, in the authorization of use of force by the U.S. Congress following the September 11, 2001 attacks was the authorization for use of military force, AUMF, which became in effect in September in 2001. And so this is still in effect. So we talked about how Barack Obama ordered the execution of al-Awlaki in Yemen, a U.S. citizen and also a Yemeni citizen, and his son died as well. How he used drone strikes. George W. Bush used drone strikes, but also Barack Obama used drone strikes against suspected terrorists. The justification was that we're at war with al-Qaeda and global jihadists. According to this authorization of the use of military force, the U.S. Congress has given the president that power, according to Bush, Obama, I guess Biden, and Trump as well, right? Going way back 24 years ago. And in order to fight the terrorists. But Trump hasn't been given this yet. So will the Congress give it to him now that he's informed the Congress under the War Powers Act? I wouldn't be surprised if they do. Although, again, they're always thinking about how can I get reelected? And Americans, they do react when there's a new war has been declared. Like they even when war is declared, they gave the benefit of the doubt to George W. Bush in reelecting him in 2004 when John Kerry ran against him, even though he was wrong. There wasn't weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was the justification. We have to invade Iraq in 2003 because Saddam Hussein is going to make nuclear and biological weapons and maybe to stop him. And then they invaded, and there was no weapons of mass destruction. They weren't there. Did George Bush get punished? Did he lose re-election in 2004? No, he got re-elected. Support the troops. Support the troops. That was the slogan, right? In 2004, and it worked. It worked. And he got reelected. And did a surge of military forces into Iraq. And then Barack Obama beat John McCain, the Vietnam War veteran senator from Arizona, against who was nominated by the Republicans. So there's some talk. And so this has been the justification for killing people by drone strikes, that we have the authorization from the US Congress in 2001. And again, it's not a declaration of war, but still it's been interpreted that way by the courts. And okay, this is basically, it's not a formal declaration of war, but it does fulfill the Congress's obligation to authorize using deadly military force. So Trump has informed the Congress, but we have to see what happens. This is an ongoing breaking news story. So are members of Congress attempting to revoke the 2001 authorization of use of military force? Yes, members of Congress are actively involved in efforts to repeal or at least significantly reform the 2001 authorization for use of force, because it leads to so-called endless wars, forever wars. When will this war against terror ever stop? So Biden, Obama, Trump, they can use a drone strike in Somalia or Pakistan or Afghanistan or anywhere where they say global jihadist terrorists are organizing against us, right? And so, of course, there's been a push to repeal a replacement, and I don't know if Trump wants that to be replaced. So some here repeal and replace legislation. Members of Congress introduced bills to repeal the 2001 authorization of military force and replace with a new, more narrowly focused one. Focus on reclaiming war powers, but in previous attempts to repeal, there have been some efforts, but they didn't go anywhere. It again, and it's all party politics, and the fact that these congressmen, they're always focused on the next elections, and they always are thinking about elections. They have to always think about elections, right? And challenging the president, because remember that rally around the flag effect that we talked about earlier, right? You're going to seriously endanger your political career. You're going to lose in an election, in a primary election, if not the general election. And so you can see, and then of course there was another one passed in 2002 against focusing on Iraq. But and it was supposedly used, even though Saddam Hussein was overthrown by US invasion in 2003, it was then used, for example, by sending the troops back in or putting the troops back in when ISIS and the jihadists were threatening to take control of big parts of Iraq and Syria, by both the Obama and Trump administration. And Donald Trump used it apparently in justifying the assassination of Soleimani, the military commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, in January 2020 in Baghdad airport. Trump had him drone struck and killed. And again, saying, well, this is all part of the fighting the terrorists in Iraq. The Iranian general was killed outside the Baghdad airport, where he was going to meet with his Baghdad militia allies. So, and now we see the U.S. President Donald Trump using all of this military powers and the so-called national emergencies that he's declaring. All these powers the president's office got during the Cold War and afterwards, to perhaps try to change the nature of the American political system in a direction that looks more like what exists in Hungary or Moscow or worse. And the Congress is not standing up to him again. And the founders of the U.S. Constitution, they were always skeptical about strong executive power authority. And because of the rise of nationalism in shaping public opinion and the identification of the leader of the executive branch as representing nationalist public opinion in the view of your typical citizen. He shapes public opinion and it therefore has a big impact on the outcome of congressional elections. And that wasn't something the founders of the US Constitution really foresaw. So, and again, I'm just trying to update the book for what's going on today. And So yeah, you can see by the end of 1965, the U.S. Had the number of troops had written over almost 200,000 troops, and by 1968, the total number of troops was over 500,000 U.S. And so again, that really motivated the anger and hostility of the American people and the polarization of the American people. And that's when the Congress began to act, particularly controlled by the other party, began to act to constrain the president. But of course, that's apparently what needs to happen now for the Congress to constrain Trump. The outcome of the upcoming November 2026 elections is really vitally important. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of talking, and of course, um, let me see here. Let's do some. Try to think about doing something a little more interactive. So let me look at my my exercise list here. All right, so that's a coverage of the most recent developments, and I want to also talk about the other factors shaping the let me go here, go to share, go here, and go stop and skip. Oh, fuck. Sorry. I can't believe this crap. So this is President Eisenhower in his farewell address. So we talked about George Washington's farewell address in 1796, warning against parties and warning against foreign entanglements. The U.S. should stay out of European international politics. So this is Dwight Eisenhower. He ran for president and was reelected, and so he's stepping down after two terms. John F. Kennedy defeated his vice president. Richard Nixon was his vice president. John F. Kennedy beat Richard Nixon in a close election, and he's giving his farewell address a few days before John F. Kennedy becomes the president of the United States in January 1961, and he warns the American people against the military-industrial complex, which is this collection of money, of large government bureaucracies, a large military, and a large industry that has grown and developed to supply this large military, which he is concerned that this military industrial complex is going to shape American politics because politicians are always thinking about the next elections. And these defense industries and defense bureaucracies, they employ millions of people, these people have their careers. Remember, talking about congressional career, your career is tied up with these big companies and organizations, and they're going to see the world in a way that's self-serving. So they're going to argue that they're going to have a predisposition to think that yes, the U.S. should fight more wars, the U.S. should be involved around the world, the U.S. should be active because their vested interests, their careers, their jobs depend upon it, right? And so he warns Americans about this as he's leaving office, and you just to continue with the rest of it. So people that like Dwight Eisenhower, that's the reason they like Dwight Eisenhower. President Dwight Eisenhower was the American commander during World War II in Western Europe. And he became the first commander, the Supreme Allied Command of Europe, with NATO being formed. And then he became a candidate for president and was elected, never having before won any elections as an elected politician before. The first time he ran for president was was for president, and he won. And so people that really like Dwight Eisenhower, they point to that speech and he's giving us the term the military-industrial complex for us to remember yeah, just to show you the military-industrial complex is a term everybody uses today. And of course, he was also the president who was elected in 1950 and was inaugurated in 1951, who was elected also to end the Korean War, right? Harry Truman was the president of the United States and in at the start of the Korean War, and he could have run for reelection in 1950, but he was unpopular because of the Korean War. And he wasn't legally prevented from running for reelection. He'd only been elected once. He became president in 1944 in 1945, I should say, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, and he was the vice president. So he became president for the rest of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's term, which would have continued to 1948. And then he won election 1948. And according to U.S. Constitution, constitutional practice, not written down until afterwards, he could have run for reelection and still have appeared to be conforming to standard tradition in the United States. But he got indications that he wouldn't win. He wouldn't get reelected because of the Korean War. And so he ran, Eisenhower, with the promise that he would do whatever it took to end the Korean War. And so he got in, and of course, the war eventually came to a ceasefire, which is still in place in June 1953. So that's the reference to the Korean War at the beginning of his statement there. But and so, but of course, Dwight Eisenhower, his foreign policy was a lot more complicated and questionable than one can basically should understand, even though he's seen as he was such an effective president. He really made the National Security Agency system work well, which was adopted in 1947 with the National Security Act of 1947 under Harry Truman, that he really set it up so that it worked really well. He was a good bureaucrat, in other words. He was good at making that work. But he was also responsible for a lot of unfortunate developments. If I show you, for example, his Secretary of State was John Foster Dulles, who was a strong Cold Warrior, and his brother of John Foster Dulles was Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, was given pretty much free rein to do whatever he thought was necessary to carry out coups, regime change through covert operations in the world under Allen Dulles, the brother of John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State under Dwight Eisenhower. So he carried out, with presidential approval, Eisenhower gave presidential approval for major regime change operations, including the 1953 Iranian coup, Operation Ajax. This was the first major CIA orchestrated coup, and Eisenhower personally approved it. The 1954 Guatemala coup, which overthrew Guzman and set the stage for a terrible civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and didn't end until the 1990s. Didn't end until the 1990s. Of course, this coup put in power the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi II, the Shah who was a CIA agent and set the stage for the rise of militant political Islam in Iran, represented by Ayatollah Khomeini, because that was the main force able to resist and challenge against the Shah that was an incredibly corrupt and brutal regime in Iran that ruled from 1953 until 1978, 1979, and set the stage for the rise of political Islam in the Islamic Republic, which is still there in Iran today. And the Bay of Pigs operation, which was an invasion that failed of expatriate Cubans hating Castro's communist revolution, which was really humiliating. He authorized assassinations of foreign leaders. So this, yeah, Eisenhower in 54 improved and National Security Council Decision 5412, which reaffirmed the CIA's responsibility for conducting covert actions and established a system of review, approved major programs. Of course, like I said, I mean, this coup against Guatemala set the stage for incredibly brutal, vicious civil war that went on for decades and decades and decades and only recently stopped. Recently for me, right? And only now are they trying to put people on trial for that and try to convict them. And again, I mentioned that Allen Dulles was the brother of John Foster Dulles. And so Eisenhower, he didn't know much about the world outside of, he knew about Europe. He knew something about Europe, but he didn't know anything about Iran. He didn't know anything about Guatemala, you know. So, but of course, many people today, they love Eisenhower because of his warning against the military industrial complex, which of course is a wise warning because as I mentioned, right, there are millions of people in the United States whose careers are tied up with these Cold War containment bureaucracies, and including the military and the economic interests that grew up around them to supply the military and other agencies that have a vested interest in seeing the world in a way by which American leadership is necessary, that America is the one indispensable nation, that those 800 military bases the U.S. has in 154 countries, those are things. We should keep them, and NATO should expand into Ukraine and elsewhere because look how it's brought peace to Western Europe. It can bring peace to the rest of Europe by bringing in those countries. And they have a collective general systemic tendency to continue to influence American politics in that direction. And if you're a congressman, you know this, right? That a lot of those arms companies that supply those companies that very famous, some of them like Boeing that make these planes and that can't transport you and me around the world. They also are major suppliers to the U.S. Air Force, right? And these companies have lots of factories that employ lots of workers. And if you're a congressman, you don't want them to go out of business. You want to keep having factories work, continue to get new orders to continue to supply those jobs to those people in your district where you run for reelection, and also they pay taxes that you need, your country needs, and your state needs, and your local government needs, and if those close, those manufacturing bases close. I'm sorry, those manufacturing factories for armaments close. You're going to pay in the next election. You're going to be responsible for that as a congressperson. You don't want to close military bases as well because those bases all over the United States, when they're in the United States, they employ lots of people. They give lots of jobs to lots of people, lots of voters. And so this military industrial complex is also an important incentive for the U.S. Congress today to continue to support spending more money on the military and even increase it. I mean, under the Biden administration, when Joe Biden was president, when the Republicans took control of the House and the Senate after the November 2022 elections, they allocated more money to the military, even more than Biden asked for. Joe Biden, another professional politician, they added another, I can't remember, it was like another 40 or $50 billion more to the defense budget than Biden had requested. Right? And this occurred after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. We had the elections in November 2022, and the Republicans took power. So Biden was already willing to spend more money on the military because, my God, now we have the largest war in Europe since World War II. We got to prepare. And the Republican Congress added $50 billion more. Let's ask Gemini, how much more did the U.S. Congress allocate to the defense budget beyond what Biden requested in, let's say 2023. Hopefully Gemini can handle this task. 45 billion. The U.S. Congress significantly increased the defense budget for fiscal 2020 beyond what President Biden initially requested was 45 billion. Biden requested 813 billion. The final was so they added 45 billion more on it, even though Biden was already, mobilizing, trying to respond to the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and of course, so the Congress is not going to cut the defense budget. I don't even know. Certainly, if the Democrats take control of the Congress, and let's say the Democrats take control of the Congress in 2028, November 2028, and there's a Democratic president elected, I don't think they're going to cut the defense budget. Even the Democrats won't. And they'll tell themselves they need to do this. It's a dangerous world. The rise of China, the alliance between Russia and China, and Iran. They're not. So, what is the defense budget today? What is the size of the U.S. defense budget today? And this is just the defense budget. It doesn't include the CIA, the intelligence agencies. You see, it can't handle it. Something went wrong. You see, I can't, for some reason, if I ask too many questions, it doesn't work. So let's go to Grok. So we go to stop share, and we go back to Grok here. And again, do the share. Go to Grok. What is the size of the U.S. defense budget today? And this doesn't include the CIA, the national, it's so it says it's almost 900 billion. So we're going to hit I think, I don't know. We'll see if it's going to get over a trillion. I mean, again, that doesn't include, as I mentioned, I think what is the size? How much of the U.S. How much U.S. federal government money annually is spent on intelligence, on the intelligence agencies? And it says, oh, wow, 101 billion. That's not in that 895 billion. That's separate. So this military industrial complex, that's kind of not adequate for what's really happening. We can call it the national security establishment. That includes the CIA, the National Security Agency, which is 5 times the size of the CIA. That includes all of these organizations that are somehow involved with U.S. national security. And the U.S., I think last time I checked, the U.S. spends $500 billion a year to contractors to supply all of these agencies. How much does the U.S. government spend to contractors every year supplying the U.S. government, the U.S. federal government? Last time I checked, it was $500 billion. And so all of those companies that supply are also part of this military industrial complex, or this national security establishment, if you want to call it that. And of course, let's see how long Grok takes. Yeah, it says, oh, well, now it says, I don't know. Sometimes Grok and Gemini are wrong, right? It says 780 billion. Well, I thought it was last time was smaller than that. So defense, logistics, veterans health, IT services, IT contracts. So defense is about almost 50% of the total. IT services, again, and that's part of hybrid warfare. And so the point is, from the perspective of congressmen, you're always thinking about the next elections. You certainly don't want those businesses that are supplying the Congress no longer to have contracts to satisfy Congress, no longer have contracts to supply those agencies, because then they're going to you're going to lose jobs in your district. So it all becomes part of this focus. So if you expect the Congress to radically reduce the U.S. Military establishment, national security establishment budget, I don't think it's going to happen, because even Democrats, they're always focused upon how to win the next elections. So just to point that out, right? The so-called military-industrial complex is a term everybody uses these days, but it's much more broad than that. And the Congress doesn't have the political will typically to challenge that. There are some who do. There are some individual Congress people who propose doing so, but they're never going to get a majority of the votes in the Congress to approve drastically reducing the size of the U.S. Budget. So we go here to back to the notes here, because of course I've done a lot of talking and I didn't plan to do so much talking, but I just wanted to make sure I update you with what's going on now, because we have according to a number of observers, well-educated, plugged-in people, that we have a constitutional crisis. We're at a constitutional crisis in the United States with Donald Trump. In the view of many, this person is a wannabe dictator, and he's using the powers of the imperial presidency that we talked about, that was the label given in 1973, to the tremendous increase in the powers and resources at the hands of the president and the executive branch that originally were given to that person during the Cold War, and then extended afterwards in the War on Terror. And of course, all of these national security establishment forces and economic actors shaping the U.S. Political system and the outcomes of the system, because through electoral democratic politics, right? And so, of course, we already mentioned the book was written and published before Trump got reelected, but it only covers the first presidential term of Trump. And so you can see there's a lot of hostility to communist China. So again, Nancy Pelosi, she was the Speaker of the House when the Democrats were in power in the House of Representatives before they lost the November 2022 elections to a majority Republican Congress. And so she went to visit Taiwan, and it infuriated the communist Chinese. But of course, Nancy Pelosi, she lives and breathes elections too, right? These people, that's what they do. I win elections, or I help my colleagues. Well, I am Speaker of the House as Nancy Pelosi because I make sure Democrats win elections. And so there are a lot of people lobbying for Taiwan to be recognized as a sovereign independent state in the United States. A lot of people. Now, Trump might not care because he doesn't care about Xi Jinping being an authoritarian dictator. But we'll see. We talked about this in previous classes. But she was the highest ranking member of the U.S. government to visit the island in 25 years. And we'll see how Trump is going to respond to this. But of course, Trump has said a number of times he doesn't care about democratic Taiwan. I mean, he may make a deal. I mean, he wants to make a deal over trade with China. We already talked about how U.S. farming sector is really hurting. So Trump wants to go to China. He wants to meet Xi Jinping, and he may well make a deal. The speculation is he may make some kind of a deal over Taiwan. But we'll see. So again, that covers Pelosi's visit to three characteristics of legislative congressional politics. Longevity. Members of Congress are more likely than ever to make their professional careers in the legislative branch. So since the 1950s, more than 80% of sitting legislators who have been reelected, they will acquire seniority, including promotions and more powerful positions on congressional committees that they select. So I think it's even higher than that, because this number includes people that this number of 80% includes people that decide not to win re-election because they don't want to do it anymore. There are a few of them, but for those people who announce they want to get reelected, over 90% of them get reelected every election, every 2 years. There's congressional elections, and the Senate, they're in office for 6 years, but 1/3 of the senators are up for reelection every 2 years. So 33, 32, 34 senators are up for reelection next year in 2026. And I don't know if I think it's unlikely that the Democrats will take both the Senate and the House. They're more likely just to take the House, despite Trump's efforts to stop them from doing that. Polarization of party unity. Congressmen tend to be more rigidly ideologically rigid, I should say, than the typical U.S. citizen. Of course, if you're a congressperson, you're an enthusiast, you're a militant political person, you're more likely, therefore, to be more ideologically rigid than most people in the United States. Keep in mind, most people don't pay close attention to politics in America, but they can still vote. So, as I said, 85% of people who vote in elections, 80 to 85%, they voted by the basis of party label. That's why Trump got reelected, right? Because he's the most popular person among Republicans. They will vote for him because he's a Republican, despite everything else he did for him to get reelected in 2024. Of course, only when one party controls both houses of Congress and the presidency is major legislation going to be approved, whether it be foreign policy or domestic legislation. It's only that time when one party controls both houses of Congress and the presidency. But again, congressmen know most of the time, most voters do not vote on the basis of foreign policy issues. They're not like you and me, right? They don't focus on foreign policy. There are a lot that do, but not most. And so they know that. Of course, they're increasing discontent because of, I think a lot of it has to do with social media and, culture war issues. So public approval of Congress, it's gone down, down, down. And you can see percentage approval, of course, during the war on terror, spiked up a bit, but then ever since then, it's been going, and we'll see what happens. I don't know what it is now. Again, during the early Cold War years, you saw how the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, approved that Gulf of Tonkin resolution, overwhelmingly so in 1964. That is broken down after the disaster of Vietnam. And so, of course, lots of important legislation was adopted. Okay, I mentioned the National Security Act. That created the Department of Defense. So Trump now wants the Department of Defense to be called the Department of War. And Pete Hegseth, his Secretary of Defense, he wants to be called Secretary of War. He wants to go back to the system that existed before 1947. But officially, it's still the Department of Defense. Is the Republican Congress going to challenge Trump and say, you can't call that the Department of War, blah? No, they're not going to do that. That will only happen if the Democrats take control of at least one house of Congress, right? But Secretary Hegseth calls himself the Secretary of War, like the War Department that used to exist before 1947. U.S. presidents have sent military forces without formal declarations of war to Vietnam, to Korea, to Central America and the Middle East. The role of Congress has tended to be to legitimize presidential decisions, and that's because of nationalism. And if you are a senator and you want to be president, even if you think George Bush is doing something wrong in Iraq, if you want to be president, if Hillary Clinton, you're going to vote to approve his request for authorization of use of military force, which she did. And so did John Kerry. And of course, we already mentioned the Gulf of Tonkin resolution here, which authorized use of all military force, all necessary measures as determined by the president. Whatever the president thought was necessary, do it, Lyndon Johnson's, those communists. And the disaster ended this consensus that tended to prevail. And we mentioned the War Powers Act passed and the War Powers Resolution, right? And other efforts to limit the powers of the presidency. But that's where I have to stop today. Do you have any questions? And again, I apologize for talking so much, but I feel like I have to update the book because this is once in a two generation period. I mean, we're in such an unusual, potentially very dangerous uh, watershed moment in United States history. We have to talk about it. And so, again, on Friday, we'll meet in class and we'll have a debate on the topic. And what's the debate topic? The debate topic is the lesson plan is yes, the U.S. Congress is likely to acquiesce to any use of deadly force by Trump in the Indo-Pacific against North Korea or China. Okay, that's all for now. And I hope you weren't disappointed that you didn't have to vote on something. But I'll try to make up for it next class. Okay, talk to you later.